My name is Claire Donovan. I am 32 years old. And on the 22nd of December, 3 days before Christmas, my mother called me at 8:19 in the morning and said, in the particular voice she uses when she has rehearsed what she is about to say and wants it to sound spontaneous, "Claire, sweetheart, I think it would be better if you didn't come to Christmas dinner this year." I was standing in my kitchen in Chicago, still in my bathrobe, holding a coffee I had not yet taken a sip of. I said, "I'm sorry." She said Melissa has been having a really hard time, and she said she doesn't feel comfortable with the tension between you two. "We just think it's better for the family if we all have a peaceful Christmas." Melissa is my younger sister. She was 30 at the time. She had been having a really hard time, by my parents' accounting, for approximately the past 12 years. Across every family gathering, holiday, and milestone in which my presence was deemed to create tension, I was always the tension. What my mother did not say in that phone call, and what she had never said in any of the hundreds of conversations like it, was this: I was making the $6,000 monthly mortgage payment on the house she was calling me from. I had been making it for 4 years. I made my last one 2 days later. This is that story. Before I go any further, I want to stop and ask you directly, where in the world are you right now, and what time is it there? Drop your city and your local time in the comments below. I love knowing where these stories travel. Whether it is a Sunday morning in Sydney with the windows open, or a late Thursday night in Manchester where you should probably be asleep, but here you are. Tell me. And if you connect with stories about women who were the invisible foundation of everything their family stood on and who, one December morning, simply stopped holding it up, hit like, hit subscribe, and stay with me. I have carried this story for 2 years, and I am finally ready to put it down. My name, in full, is Claire Marie Donovan. I grew up in Naperville, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago that my parents, Robert and Judith Donovan, had moved to in the late 90s because of the school district. Robert spent 30 years as a civil engineer with a consulting firm downtown. Judith ran the household and, for 15 of those years, ran a small catering operation out of the kitchen that produced a modest but consistent supplemental income. They were not wealthy people, but they were comfortable people, and the comfort was real and hard-won, and I respected it. The house on Elmwood Court was a 4-bedroom colonial they had purchased in 2001 for $260,000. By the time of this story, it was worth somewhere between $480,000 and $500,000. The mortgage, which had been refinanced twice and which had accumulated a second home equity line taken out to fund Melissa's various fresh starts, carried a monthly obligation of $6,040. The house was in my parents' names. The payment, for 4 years, had come from my bank account. My sister Melissa Grace Donovan was 2 years younger than me. She is now 31. If you have a sibling who has occupied the role that Melissa occupied in our family, you will recognize the taxonomy immediately, and you will not need me to explain the architecture of it. If you do not, let me describe it as precisely as I can. Melissa was, from an early age, the family's designated fragile one. Not fragile in the clinical sense. Melissa was not unwell in a way that required professional management, though she had seen several therapists over the years, none of whom she stayed with for longer than 4 months. Fragile in the operational sense. The understanding, absorbed and distributed throughout the family system, that Melissa's emotional state was the barometer to which all other activity had to be calibrated. If Melissa was upset, the priority was Melissa's comfort. If Melissa and Claire had a disagreement, the cause was assumed to originate with Claire. If a family event was going to involve something that Melissa found difficult, and the category of things Melissa found difficult was both broad and flexible, the accommodation went in Melissa's direction. Every time. I want to be honest about Melissa, because she deserves accuracy rather than caricature. Melissa was not a malicious person. She was not a person who sat in a room calculating how to extract resources from her family. She was a person who had been taught from a very early age that her discomfort was an emergency and that the people around her would reorganize themselves to resolve it. When you are taught that, you believe it, and you act from it, and you develop a sense of the world in which your feelings are the most important fact in any room. The damage is done not by the person who learns the lesson, but by the people who taught it. Melissa was not my villain. She was someone shaped by the same household I was shaped by, only shaped in the opposite direction. I was shaped to be the capable one. Not warmly, not admiringly, that is a distinction that matters. I was capable in the functional sense, the way a structural beam is capable. Necessary, load-bearing, not especially celebrated. When I was 11 and Melissa was 9, I was the one who got myself up, got myself to school, got myself through homework, because my mother's attention was frequently occupied by Melissa's latest difficulty, a social conflict, a bad grade, a sleepover that had gone wrong. When I was 14 and applying to honors programs, the relevant parental attention was on Melissa's transition to middle school, which had been rocky. When I was 17 and receiving a full academic scholarship to the University of Illinois, the conversation at the dinner table that evening was longer about Melissa's struggle with the PSAT than about my scholarship. I did not perform grievance about any of this. I simply noted it, filed it, and kept moving. I had learned to keep moving. It was my most reliable skill. I want to give you more of the childhood picture, because the adult story is only fully legible if you understand what the family looked like when its patterns were being formed. My clearest early memory of the operational dynamic is from a Saturday when I was 9 years old and Melissa was 7. We were both at a neighbor's birthday party, the Hendersons, 3 houses down, a girl named Amy who was turning 8. Partway through the afternoon, Melissa got into some kind of conflict with another child over a game. The specifics are lost to me, but the outcome is not. My mother was called. She arrived within 10 minutes, took Melissa home, and spent the rest of the afternoon managing her feelings about the incident. I was left at the party, which was fine. I was 9 and capable of managing a birthday party, but I remember standing in the Hendersons' backyard with a plate of cake and understanding something that I did not yet have language for. The understanding was this: Melissa's distress was an event. My contentment was a baseline. Events receive responses. Baselines are assumed. That asymmetry ran through everything: school projects, friendship difficulties, extracurricular choices, college applications. Melissa's struggles were family projects. My achievements were individual ones. This was not cruelty. I want to keep being clear about that. It was a family system's unconscious distribution of attention, guided by the principle, never stated, completely operational, that the squeaky wheel was the one that needed oil. I was not squeaky. I had learned, early and thoroughly, that squeak produced not oil but comparison. "Why can't you be more like Claire?" was something Melissa heard in various forms, and which produced in her, I now understand, a particular kind of resentment of me that was not her fault and was not mine, but was real. We were both being damaged by the same mechanism from opposite sides. I did not understand this fully until I was in my late 20s. Understanding it did not immediately produce compassion, but it eventually did. I graduated from the University of Illinois with a degree in computer science and a minor in mathematics, and moved to Chicago at 22 to take a position at a software company in the West Loop. I was, by the time of the Christmas phone call, a senior software engineer at a healthcare technology firm where I had worked for 6 years, with a salary of $127,000 and a lifestyle that was comfortable and mostly quiet and entirely self-funded. I had not received financial help from my parents since I graduated college. I mention this not to claim virtue, but to establish context. The flow of money in our family ran one direction. It ran toward Melissa. Over the course of the years between my graduation and the Christmas phone call, my parents had funded the following in Melissa's life: a first apartment in Naperville after a job that did not work out, a second apartment after the first fell through, a portion of the legal fees from a brief and unpleasant entanglement that I was never given full details about, a used car to replace the one she had totaled, a certification program in graphic design she enrolled in and withdrew from after 6 weeks, a second certificationship that ended. Melissa had moved back to the Naperville area and was living in a rental apartment that my parents partially subsidized. She was, at the time of this story, working part-time at a home goods store and, quote, figuring out her next step, which had been her status, in a variety of forms, for the better part of a decade. The mortgage situation had begun 4 years before the Christmas call, and I want to explain how it began, because the how matters enormously for the character of the story. My father, Robert, had a cardiac event, Not severe, not a full heart attack, but a serious enough warning that his doctor placed him on reduced work hours and prescribed significant lifestyle changes. In the same month, his consulting firm went through a restructuring and Robert's role was eliminated. He was 61 years old. He received a severance package. The severance covered 8 months of expenses. After 8 months, the gap between their income, my mother's catering, some savings, Robert's partial Social Security, and their expenses, principally the mortgage, was approximately $6,000 monthly. My parents did not ask me for help. I want to be clear about this. They did not call me and explain the situation and ask for assistance. What happened was that I came home for Thanksgiving that year, looked at the stack of mail on the hall table that my father had not been opening, asked my mother a direct question, and received an answer that she had clearly been preparing to delay as long as possible. The mortgage was 4 months behind. There was a notice from the lender. The equity line had been tapped to its maximum. They were, by any practical definition, in danger of losing the house they had lived in for 23 years. I drove back to Chicago on the Sunday after Thanksgiving. I sat at my kitchen table, and I thought for a long time. I am a person who processes numerically, who looks at a problem and instinctively translates it into an equation with known and unknown values. The equation was not complicated. My parents were going to lose their house unless something changed. My income was sufficient to cover the gap. The question was whether I was willing to do it, and for how long, and on what terms, and whether those terms needed to be spoken aloud or could simply be understood. I made a decision that I have examined many times since, from many angles, and that I understand differently now than I did then. I set up a monthly bank transfer of $6,040, timed to hit my parents' account 3 business days before the first of the month. I did not announce it formally. I called my father and said I was going to help with the mortgage for a while. He said, "Claire, you don't have to do that." I said, "I know. I want to." He said, "Your mother and I will pay you back." I said, "Dad, don't worry about it right now. Just focus on getting healthy." That was the full conversation. I did not negotiate terms. I did not establish a timeline. I did not discuss what the arrangement meant or what it would require of anyone in return. That was my mistake, and I own it completely. You cannot give something without terms, and then expect the terms to be intuited. That is not a reasonable expectation of anyone. It is, however, what I expected. And for 3 years and 11 months, nothing in how my family treated me reflected any awareness that I was making possible the house they lived in. I need to pause here for a moment because I think some of you watching right now are in a version of this room. The room where you have been quietly making something possible for people who do not know or who have chosen not to examine what their comfort costs. If that is you, drop a comment below, just tell me you are there. And hit subscribe, because what I did in the 2 days after that December phone call is the part of this story that I want you to stay for. The family history between Melissa and me, in the years between my moving to Chicago and the Christmas call, was not dramatic. I want to be precise about this, because I think the lack of drama is important. There was no single enormous incident. There was no explosion, no betrayal of the kind that makes a clean story. There was a cumulative pattern of small adjustments, all moving in the same direction, that had the effect, over years, of shrinking my place in the family to something vestigial. My presence at family events was always welcome in the abstract and complicated in the specific. If I was there for Christmas, there was tension. If I was there for Easter, Melissa found the gathering overwhelming. If I was there for my mother's birthday dinner, Melissa left early, and my parents spent the next 2 days managing her. I had stopped being surprised by this. I had not stopped feeling it, but I had stopped being surprised. In the 2 years before the Christmas phone call, I had attended 3 family events out of 7 to which I had been invited, skipping 4, either because the implied message that my presence was problematic had been conveyed explicitly enough that attendance felt pointless, or because my own sense of self-preservation had finally begun to operate. The 3 events I attended had gone the way they always went, pleasant in their surface, managed in their texture, with Melissa's mood functioning as the weather system everyone else dressed for. I had driven home from each of those events, and sat in the quiet of my apartment and been honest with myself about what I was choosing to continue doing. The 4 years of mortgage payments deserve more detail than I have given them, because the texture of that period is important. It was not 4 years of silent martyrdom. It was not 4 years of waiting for acknowledgement. It was 4 years of living my life, which was genuinely good in many respects, while also making a transfer on the first of every month that I had chosen to make, and that I had chosen not to stop. I had chosen not to stop it for several reasons, all of which made sense to me at the time, and none of which I entirely regret. The primary reason was my father's health. Robert Donovan's cardiac situation had stabilized but not resolved, and I knew, from the calls we had regularly, the ones that were more honest than the ones with my mother, that his stress about the house was a meaningful variable in his recovery. Every month I made the transfer, I was also making a choice about my father's well-being, and that was a choice I was willing to make. The secondary reason was more uncomfortable to examine, which is why I am only fully examining it now with 2 years of distance. I continued making the payment, in part because it gave me a form of belonging in the family that my actual presence could not. I was contributing something real and material that could not be qualified or managed or made to feel uncomfortable. The payment arrived regardless of whether Melissa found me difficult that month. The payment did not require my parents to navigate anything. It simply appeared, and the house was possible, and in some part of myself I had concluded that being materially necessary was the version of being loved that I was going to be able to access. That is a painful thing to write. It is true. I am writing it because I think it will be useful to someone who is watching this and recognizing it, and because the thing that does not get named continues to operate underground. I am naming it so it stops operating. The December phone call was not a surprise. It was the explicit version of a message I had been receiving for years. What made it different from the previous iterations was the specificity of the exclusion. Not Melissa is having a hard time, but please do not come to Christmas dinner, and the casualness of the delivery. My mother said it the way you say, I think it might rain, you should bring an umbrella. There was no apparent recognition that she was calling her older daughter 3 days before Christmas to disinvite her from the family holiday, because her younger daughter found her presence uncomfortable. There was no visible awareness of what that call was. There was just the rehearsed voice and the reasonable tone, and the weight of it landing on me like a thing that had been accumulating for 32 years and had finally found its full form. I said, "Okay, Mom." I said it because there was nothing else to say in that moment. Nothing useful, nothing that would have produced a different outcome, nothing that the moment was ready to hold. I said okay. I hung up. I put my coffee down on the counter, still untouched and now cold. I stood in my kitchen for 4 minutes, and then I opened my banking app. The transfer was set to process on the 24th, 2 days away. I looked at it for a moment. The recurring transfer. The $6,040 line that had been appearing in my transaction history every month for 4 years. I thought about my father's voice when he said, "I'll pay you back." I thought about my mother's voice on the phone 20 minutes ago. I thought about the $412 I had last spent on a birthday gift from Melissa, who had said thank you exactly once, and had not called me on my birthday the following month. I thought about the house on Elmwood Court, and the 4 bedrooms, and the Christmas dinner I would not be attending. And then I canceled the transfer. I want to be precise about what I felt when I did it. It was not anger. Anger would have been less precise than what I felt. What I felt was the specific, clarifying sensation of an equation resolving of a balance that had been held artificially being released to find its natural level. I had been holding $6,040 a month above what the equation required. I had been doing it voluntarily, without terms, while the people I was doing it for treated my presence in their lives as a liability. The equation, without the artificial holding, was simply true. I am a person who finds truth clarifying. I felt clear. I did not call my parents that day. I did not send a message. I spent Christmas Eve alone in my apartment in Chicago, which I want you to know was not a miserable experience. I ordered Vietnamese food. I watched 2 films I had been meaning to watch for months. I called my friend Dara, who is 34 and funny and who had listened to 4 years of this family situation with the particular patience of someone who has been waiting for you to take a specific action and is wise enough to never say out loud that they have been waiting. I told Dara what I had done. She said, "Finally." That was all. I slept well. I want to tell you about Dara, because Dara is part of this story in a way that the story has not fully acknowledged. Dara Chen was 34 years old at the time of this story, a UX designer who had been my closest friend since we met at a work event 4 years earlier. Dara was and is the kind of person who listens without agenda, who hears what you are saying and what you are not saying with equal attention, and who does not volunteer the second part back to you until you are ready to hear it. She had known about the mortgage payments from the beginning. She had known about the Christmas exclusions, the birthday forgotten, the graduation from my master's program in 2018 that my parents had not attended because Melissa had been having a particularly difficult month and travel felt like too much. Dara had never once said, "You should stop doing this," or "This isn't fair," or any of the direct address things that would have made me defensive. She had simply been present and honest when I asked her direct questions, and had waited, with what I now understand was considerable patience, for the moment when I arrived at the conclusion myself. When I called her on Christmas Eve and told her I had canceled the transfer, she said finally, and then she said, "How do you feel?" I said clear. She said good. That was the whole exchange on the topic. We spent the next hour talking about a show we had both been watching, and the book she had just finished, and whether I should get a second houseplant. That is the specific gift that Dara gave me on Christmas Eve. She treated the decision as already resolved and moved on, which meant I did not spend the evening rehearsing it. I spent the evening being present, which was what I needed. I have not said this to her directly, because Dara is not a person who requires gratitude to be verbalized. But I am saying it now, here, because the people who hold the space around your difficult moments deserve to be part of the story. On the 27th of December, my father called. Robert Donovan was 65 years old at the time of this call, and had, since his cardiac event, cultivated the kind of quiet that comes to certain men when they have been frightened by their own body's vulnerability and have started paying more careful attention to what is real. He said, "Claire." I said, "Dad." He said, "The mortgage payment didn't come through." I said, "I know." A pause. I canceled it. Another pause, longer. "Can I ask why?" I had thought about this sentence for 5 days. Not the answer. I knew the answer, but the form of the answer. The one that was true without being weaponized, that said what was real without performing grievance. I said, "Dad, I've been making that payment every month for 4 years. 2 days ago, Mom called and told me not to come to Christmas." I sat with that, and I realized something. I cannot continue to make possible a home that I am not welcome in. He did not speak for a long time. I listened to the silence. Then he said, "She told you not to come." It was not a question. Yes. Another silence. "I didn't know she was going to do that," he said. I believed him. Robert Donovan was a man who processed slowly and honestly, and the weight in his voice was the weight of a man confronting something he had been not looking at for years and was now looking at directly. "I'm sorry, Claire," he said. Those 3 words, from my father, landed differently than they would have from anyone else, not because they fixed anything, because they were real. "I know, Dad," I said. "What do you need from me in terms of the mortgage?" he asked. I said, "I need you to make the payment." He said, "Of course." We were quiet for a moment. I said, "I love you, Dad." He said, "I love you too, kid." That was the full conversation. My mother called on the 29th. Her call had a different quality than my father's. It had the quality of a person who has been told something they do not want to hold and is calling to redistribute it. She said, "Claire, I understand you canceled the mortgage transfer." I said yes. She said, "I have to be honest with you, that felt like a punishment." I let the sentence sit for a moment. Then I said, "Mom, it wasn't a punishment. It was a consequence. There's a difference." She said, "You're my daughter. I don't think it's fair to make us pay for a decision that was really about Melissa." I said, "The decision was about me. You called me 3 days before Christmas and asked me not to come to dinner because my sister finds me uncomfortable. I've been the person who doesn't get to come to things for 12 years. I've also been the person making your mortgage payment for 4 years. I can only do one of those things. I can make the payment as part of a family that treats me as a member of it. I cannot make the payment for a family that treats my presence as a problem to be managed." My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't know why you always make everything about you." I said, "Good luck with the mortgage, Mom." I said it without heat, without drama, and hung up. I sat on my couch and noticed that I felt nothing in particular. Not cold, not satisfied, just clean, like a surface that has finally been cleared of everything that had been piled on it, without reason. What followed over the next several weeks was not a single resolution. It was a slow reckoning of the kind that family systems undergo when an assumption they have been operating on is removed, and the structure has to find a new distribution of weight. My mother made the mortgage payment in January. I know this because my father told me in a call in mid-January that they had found a way to cover it, which meant they had moved money from their savings, which meant the runway was short, and the conversation about the house's long-term future could not be avoided. My father began that conversation with a financial advisor in late January. I was not part of those discussions and did not expect to be. Melissa called me in February. I want to tell you about this call because it matters, and because I want to be accurate about Melissa's capacity for honesty, which turned out to be more than I had given her credit for. She called on a Tuesday evening at 7:43. She said, "Claire, I know why you stopped the payments." I said, "Okay." She said, "I didn't know you were making them. They never told me." I said, "I know." She said, "I've been thinking about that." A pause. "I've been thinking about a lot of things, actually. I talked to a new therapist in January." I said, "Good." She said something that I've been sitting with. She said that the family member who gets the most accommodation is often the one who is the least equipped to function without it. And I've been thinking about whether that's true about me. I did not respond immediately. I let the sentence exist. Then I said, "What do you think?" She said, "I think it might be." Another pause. "I'm sorry you got told not to come to Christmas, Claire. I did say I was uncomfortable. I didn't tell them to exclude you, but I let them make that decision and I didn't stop it. And that's the same thing." That was the most honest thing Melissa had said to me in perhaps 20 years. I said, "Thank you for saying that." She said, "I don't know what happens next." I said, "Me neither. But this is a better place to start than most of the places we've been." We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing dramatic. Her job, my work, a book she had been reading. It was the most normal conversation we had had since childhood. I drove nowhere after hanging up. I was already home. In March, my parents sat down with a financial advisor and produced a realistic picture of what the house on Elmwood Court required versus what they could sustain without supplemental help. The picture was what I had known it would be. The house was not sustainable on their income alone. They listed it in April. It sold in June for $492,000 after 3 weeks on the market. They paid off the mortgage and the home equity line and had, after transaction costs, approximately $208,000 remaining. They used a portion of that to set up a rental situation in a smaller place in the same area. A 2-bedroom apartment in a complex that was manageable and quiet and near the doctors they had been seeing for years. My father told me about the apartment in a call in May, before the close. He said, "It's a good place, Claire. You should come see it." I said, "I will, Dad." I also want to name something about the act of driving home from those family events that I think is worth saying. The drive from Naperville to Chicago takes about 45 minutes on the expressway, longer if there is traffic. And I made that drive after every family gathering I attended over the years in a particular state of mind that I can now describe precisely, though at the time I could only feel it. It was the state of a person who has spent several hours being managed rather than seen, performing normalcy around the edges of a room where their presence was a variable someone else was constantly adjusting for. The drive home from those evenings was the only time I could stop performing. I would get on the expressway and the tightness in my shoulders would release over the first 10 miles, and by the time I was in the city, I was myself again. I noticed this pattern for years. I did not act on what it was telling me for years. Patterns are patient. They wait. I visited in July, 7 months after the Christmas phone call. I drove down from Chicago on a Saturday morning and arrived at 11. My mother opened the door. She looked at me for a moment with an expression I did not have a word for, and then she said, "I'm glad you came." Not "I'm sorry for December." Not an apology with the structure of an apology. But something in the register of acknowledgement, something that said the distance between where we were and where we had been was real and that she knew it. I said, "I'm glad too, Mom." I came in. The apartment was smaller than the house and arranged with the particular care of people who have moved to a smaller space and made it genuinely theirs. The kitchen smelled like her pot roast. My father was in the living room and he stood up when I came in and we hugged in the way we had not hugged since before I was a teenager, fully, without performance. I sat down on the new couch and my mother brought me a coffee and we talked for 3 hours about things that were real. My work, my father's health, the neighborhood, a garden plot they had found in a community garden 2 blocks away that my mother was already planning. Melissa was not there. That was not arranged. She simply was not there, and her absence from that afternoon felt, for the first time, like an ordinary fact rather than a managed circumstance. I need to tell you about something that happened near the end of that July visit, because it is the part of this story I have thought about the most. My father walked me to my car when I was leaving. It was late afternoon by then, the kind of July afternoon where the light goes gold and the air cools suddenly. He stood by the driver's side door and he said, "Claire, I want to tell you something I should have said a long time ago." I waited. "You have always been the one who held things up." I knew it when it was happening, and I let it happen, and I told myself it was because you were capable, and that capable people could handle more. That was not a good reason. Capable people deserve the same. He paused, finding the word, the same gentleness as everyone else. More, maybe because they're usually the last ones to ask for it. I did not speak for a moment. I looked at the gold light on the parking lot. I said, "Dad, that means a lot." He said, "I know it's late." I said, "It's not too late." He nodded. We hugged again. I got in my car and I sat there for a few minutes before I started the engine, not because I was emotional. I was, but that was not why I sat, but because I wanted to stay in the moment for a moment. To let it be what it was without immediately moving through it to the next thing. I had spent my whole life moving through things to the next thing. I am learning, at 32, to sit still in the good ones. There are a few more things the story requires before it is complete. The mortgage payments. 4 years of monthly transfers. 48 payments of $6,040, totaled $289,920. I have never asked my parents to acknowledge that figure specifically, and I do not intend to. It was money I gave freely, without terms, in service of a relationship I hoped would be different than it was. The money is not the thing I want back. The money was the cost of learning something I needed to learn, which is that care given without terms is not sustainable and is not love. It is a transaction in which one person pays and the other person spends, without ever seeing the invoice. I do not regret the money. I regret the years of treating my own needs as secondary in order to make something possible that was not, ultimately, making me possible. I want to tell you about the March promotion, not because it is the resolution of the story. It is not a resolution. The story does not resolve in a clean way. It is ongoing and complicated, and that is the nature of family stories. But because of what it represented in terms of the internal shift that had been happening since December. The promotion was to lead engineer on a new product initiative, a role that had been discussed for 2 years, and that I had been passed over for once, 18 months earlier, in a decision that I had taken personally at the time and have since understood more accurately. I was passed over because I was not advocating for myself. I was doing the work, I was producing the results, I was being reliable and excellent and quiet about it, and I was waiting for the work to speak for itself without speaking alongside it. Sound familiar? In January, after the Christmas phone call, and after the conversation with my father, and after the particular clarity that had been spreading through my life since I canceled that transfer, I had a direct conversation with my manager. I told her I wanted the lead engineer role. I said specifically what I had done and why I was the right person. She looked at me with mild surprise. The surprise of someone who has been waiting for you to say a thing out loud, and said she agreed and that the discussion would happen in the next review cycle. The decision was made in March. The promotion was offered in writing on a Tuesday morning. I accepted in 5 minutes. I tell you this because I think the internal and the external move together. When I stopped holding up the house, I had more energy for what I was actually building. When I stopped organizing my family life around the management of my sister's comfort, I had more of myself available for the work I was doing. These are not metaphors. They are practical truths. The energy you spend maintaining something that is not sustainable is energy you are not spending on the things that are. Canceling the mortgage payment was not only about the mortgage. It was about reclaiming the resources, financial, emotional, attentional, that had been flowing in a direction that was not producing anything in return. And reclaiming them changed the equation in more places than one. I am still a senior software engineer in Chicago. I got a promotion in March, a title I had been working toward for 2 years, and a salary increase that brought my total compensation to $149,000. I have, in the 7 months since the promotion, been relearning what it feels like to earn money that stays in my account, that is mine to allocate toward things I choose, that does not disappear on the first of the month into a house I was not permitted to enter in December. It is a specific and unusual pleasure. I recommend it. Melissa is in therapy, the kind she is staying with this time. She mentioned it in passing the last time we talked, and the way she mentioned it had the particular quality of something that has become ordinary rather than announced. She has a full-time job now, the first in several years. She is not fixed, because people are not broken in ways that require fixing, but she is different, and the difference appears to be coming from inside her, rather than from someone else accommodating her into a shape that is more comfortable for the room. I am choosing to be glad about this rather than resentful about the timing of it. The timing is the timing. My parents are in their apartment. My father gardens. My mother still cooks. They are managing in the way of people who have made a downward adjustment and are finding, with some surprise, that the smaller life contains more of what was real than the larger one did. My mother and I speak on the phone on Sunday evenings, which was my idea and which she accepted immediately, which tells me something. The calls are not long. 20 minutes, 30, on a good Sunday. We are building a version of a relationship that is different from the one we had. I do not know yet what it will look like when it is fully built. I am patient with that uncertainty in a way I was not capable of 3 years ago. Progress is progress. I want to say something to you directly, and I want to say it carefully because I think it matters. There is a version of this story that is about canceled payments and a Christmas dinner and a house being sold. That version is the surface. The version underneath is about something that I think a lot of people who watch stories like this are wrestling with, quietly, in their own lives. The question of what you owe the people who made you, and what you owe yourself, and how to tell the difference between care and self-erasure. I do not have a clean answer to that question. But I have found, through doing the painful work of arriving at it in my own life, something that functions as a working principle. You cannot hold something up indefinitely. That is not reaching back. That is not abandonment. That is physics. Weight held in one direction, without reciprocation, without acknowledgement, without the basic decency of being treated as a person rather than a structural element. Weight held like that is not love. It is load-bearing. And load-bearing without support eventually fails. Not because the beam is weak, because no beam is built to hold indefinitely without any of the load coming back. I stopped being the beam in December. I am still standing. The house is someone else's now, and the Christmas dinner I missed has been followed by a July visit and a Sunday phone call, and a father who said something in a gold-lit parking lot in summer that I will carry for a long time. The equation is not perfectly resolved. Equations rarely are. But it is honest, and honest, I have found, is a much better place to live than correct. My name is Claire Donovan. I am 32 years old. I live in Chicago. My father gardens in a community plot 2 blocks from his apartment. My sister is in therapy that she is staying with this time. My mother's pot roast smells the same in the apartment as it did in the house. And I have never in my life spent a Christmas alone that mattered less than the one I spent ordering Vietnamese food and watching films and calling Dara, who said finally, which was the exact right word. My mother's pot roast is a specific detail that I included deliberately, because I think food is one of the ways that families encode love, even when the other encoding systems are failing. The pot roast smelled the same in the apartment as it did in the house, because my mother had been making it the same way since I was a child, and walking into that smell in a new space was both a continuity and a small proof that some things in the family were real and had been real the whole time. I am not a sentimental person by default, but I am an honest one, and honest requires acknowledging the pot roast alongside everything else. It was good. It has always been good. Some things are simply true. Thank you for staying with this story. I know it is a quiet one. The loud ones are easier, but the quiet ones are the ones that stay. Drop a comment and tell me this. What is the thing you have been holding up for someone else that they have never acknowledged? You do not have to name them, just name the thing. I want to know. Hit subscribe because we have more of these, and every single one of them belongs to a woman who was the beam and who found out, one day, that she was allowed to put it down. I will see you in the next one.